Close Up is brought to you by the all-new Kia Sportage, driving design.
OK, he gets points for bravery. Today, John Key used the words asset sales. To be frank, politicians are usually advised to keep that phrase under wraps until the last possible moment. But the Prime Minister, in his State of the Nation speech, says we need to get our financial house in order, and that means building up savings and cutting costs. Savings, he says, can be encouraged by selling off a minority share in state assets like power companies. Cost cutting to the tune of $200 or $300 million is signalled but not identified. John Key joins me now. OK, Prime Minister, where are you going to cut this $200 to $300 million?
Well, I've challenged the ministers to go away and have a look at that. But if we put a bit of context around it, the previous Labor government in the last 5 budgets spent on average an increase of $2.8 billion. We cut that back to $1.1 billion. We're now saying $800 million. OK,
but look, you can't tell me you didn't get up today and give that speech and signal $200 to $300 million in cuts without knowing where they're going to come from.
Well, I'm confident we can find it. Obviously, I wouldn't promise that to the New Zealand
What, you don't know?
Well, I'm going to go through a series of looking at the options available. But let's understand this. The government spends, on your behalf, $70 billion a year. So can we tighten our belts a little bit to make sure that New Zealand interest rates stay low, to make sure that we have an environment that delivers jobs? Well, I'd say to you, we've got no other option, because if we don't do that, New Zealand will be downgraded and New Zealanders will pay more for their interest rates.
A lot of people might agree with you, but I mean, I'm just wondering why you can't be more candid. I mean, I would suggest number one on the list is going to be benefits, isn't it?
We are looking at welfare reform, and that's probably not identified in the $200 to $300 million. But we've got a welfare working group that's due to report back to the government very soon, and it'll make a series of recommendations, I believe. But it's trying to answer that fundamental question: should New Zealand have 350,000 New Zealanders of working age on a benefit? And I would strongly say to you, no. I think that's too many.
So you're accepting that part of those cuts will be in terms of benefits? It's part of the savings?
Well, not so much that $200 or $300 million. What I'd say to you is the government needs to get its house in order with its big structural areas. So one of the areas we identified today is the cost of running government itself. But I think we can find $200 or $300 million in certain programs that we run that aren't as effective as they need to be. Now, as I say, New Zealanders have to tighten their belts. We have to do the same. That will get us back into surplus quicker, and that will take the pressure off interest rates.
Which is why I'm sure, Prime Minister, that you and your ministers would have done this exercise already. Yeah. And I can't understand, well, you can't tell us and tell the people of New Zealand tonight, these are some of the areas where we're going to cut that $200 to $300 million.
Well, we haven't done the exercise yet, but we will when we go into the budget. So this is a precursor to the budget, but it is an indication that we have decided that we're going to run a tighter fiscal policy. That means we're not going to spend as much money. And I take a step back and say, look, New Zealand has built up, through both the public and the private sector, over the last decade, an enormous amount of debt. So if you look at countries that owe money to foreigners, we owe more money to foreigners as a percentage of our borrowing than any other developed countries. And if you look at the countries that have a profile that look like us, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, do we really want to be in that position? Well, I can't look New Zealanders in the eye and say I'm going to lead a country that goes to a point where we lose jobs, we lose businesses, and they pay more because we're not prepared to take some hard measures.
OK, but you're telling me right now that you can't look New Zealanders in the eye tonight and say, I know the areas we're going to cut. You don't know. No,
because there's a wide range, and the Cabinet will go away and consider all of those options, and we'll come back with a full program. But in the end, when we go to deliver Budget 2011, we'll spell out very clearly. But I don't think we can be criticised as a government for not being clear about what we're doing. I made it quite clear.
Oh, sure, but it's the detail, I suppose, Prime Minister. Look, let's move on to asset sales.
We will. But
you're saying you're going to... Asset sales, you can sell up to 49%. Look, we used to own Air New Zealand, sold it, bought it back. Used to own the railways, sold it, bought it back. Do we really want to be sort of getting into this sort of asset sale? I mean, what's in it for people buying it? Asset sales haven't worked in the past, have they?
Well, I think they have in certain parts. It depends on how you do them. But again, let's take a step back. Last year, we put together an investment statement. So we asked how many assets do we own and what are they worth? And the answer was, across everything, $220 billion. Over the course of the next 5 years, we want to buy $33 billion approximately of new assets. So we've got 3 ways of doing that. One is we just say, because we have to borrow all that money at the moment. We don't have that money. So we can say, one, we don't want to borrow that money. We can't afford to do it. We don't want to see New Zealand downgraded.
Sure.
So we don't get those assets you need, hospitals, roads, broadband, whatever it is. The second option is we go out there and we just borrow more, in which case I can tell you New Zealand will be downgraded. And the third option, I think, is we say we release some capital in one area to invest in others.
OK, if you sell, say, power companies, everyone pays a power bill in this country. So private ownership comes into that. They're going to be wanting a return on their money. Well, they get a return by bumping up the prices of power or sacking some of the people who work for the companies.
Well, firstly, the government expects a return on its money. So we expect a 9% return from these companies today. But secondly, let's go back and look at the last 9 years of a Labor government. 100% ownership of those power assets. Power went up 72%.
Sure. Yep,
so it wasn't the ownership mark of those assets that drove up power prices. Again, go back to what's doing that. Generation costs, well, we've reduced those costs through changes to the RMA. Regulation, well, Jerry Brownlee's rolled out full regulation. And actually, competition in those businesses, because that's what can actually lower their prices.
But if the government's still the majority owner of these businesses and the public's buying in, what difference is that going to make, Prime Minister?
Well, let's look at Air New Zealand. So here's an interesting model. If it's such a bad model, why didn't the previous government buy back the 25% of Air New Zealand we don't own? What happens when you have public and private
If it's such a
owners?
good model, why'd we sell it in the first place?
Well, that's a different debate, and I can't go and relitigate what happened in the 80s and 90s. What I can tell you, when they did some asset sales there, New Zealand was fundamentally broke back then, and actually, by the way, got a few things wrong. But we've said, we think bringing in some external analysis of companies, and that's what happens when private sector people have shares, we think we can not only release that capital to purchase new assets, but make them go faster, we can give New Zealanders opportunities to invest.
Prime Minister, we're running out of time, but a simple question for people watching tonight. This program of asset sales or partial asset sales, will their power prices go up under that model?
Not as a result of that model. There'll always be increases in power prices. I mean, that's inevitably been the case. And as I say, it was 72% under the last 9 years.
But you say you can manage them better.
Well, we have done. The 2 years we've been in office, we've seen very modest increases in power prices. So you'll get increases in power prices. No one's arguing that. But let's go back to Air New Zealand. Is the fact that they are partially owned by the private sector making Air New Zealand uncompetitive? Well, quite the opposite. They're an innovative company. They're a good corporate citizen. They've got very competitive prices.
So buy back Telecom, buy the same model.
Well, we can't afford... The issue is we can't afford to go and buy all of those things. What we are saying is, let's give New Zealanders an opportunity to invest. They'll be at the front of the queue. I mean, we've got 1.5 million New Zealanders with a KiwiSaver account. Where are they going to put their money? In Australian firms at the moment. Why wouldn't they put them in New Zealand firms?
Look, finally, before we go, you've got troubles with the Maori Party. ACT have had troubles as well. You're now talking about asset sales. This election is not going to be about policies. It's going to be about John Key.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, this election is about where we take the country, and it's about the 3 years of government that we've had and leadership that we've shown. Now, I think when we came into office, we had an economy that was in a deep recession, we had high inflation, we had spiralling deficits, and in the 3 years we will have been in government, I think we will have proven to New Zealanders we've got a plan for lifting incomes, jobs, and making a difference. But in the end, that'll be for them to
So it doesn't matter who leads the National Party?
Well, I'm enjoying the job, and I hope New Zealanders will give us a chance at the second term. But in the end, I believe people vote on what's right for New Zealand and the mixture of policies. And I think we've got good policies in both the social and economic area.
OK, John Key, thanks for your time tonight.